the close location they have to Syria when Syria had all these chemical weapons because they were worried that they could use any in Israel. Did Assad really care about that, though? It seemed like, to me, just reading from the outside, it was like one of those things where, yeah.
But it's a very perilous situation.
Now, where is, speaking of elephants in the room, where is Israel in all this? Alessi, you sent me a video earlier. I don't know if we can play that because it might be graphic, but at least for Joby to see it. Of what was the name of that bomb they did, Alessi? The earthquake bomb. Yeah. So Israel's apparently putting earthquake bombs in Syria now. Israel dropped an earthquake bomb on Syria yesterday, 3.1 on the Richter scale. Beyond 650 airstrikes, Israel dropped an earthquake bomb depicted in this video in northwestern Syria near the city of Tartus, leading to a supposed giant mushroom cloud fireball. The bomb was so powerful that it was measured as a 3.1 magnitude earthquake on the seismic sensor, as strong as the earthquake of that measure. It was the strongest bomb Israel has used over 14 months as the country takes more land in the south and pummels various sites across Syria by air. So my understanding is since this latest war broke out, they've taken some area in the Golan Heights, I guess preemptively. Like, what's the strategy here? Like, What are they thinking?
So Israel sees an opportunity here.
No, Israel? They would never. Come on.
And it's, they've been pretty much, striking in Syria whenever they felt like it, when they saw Iranians or Hezbollah doing things. So if they saw, missiles coming in or just new capabilities that Hezbollah or the Iranians were working on, they had the freedom to go after those. And oddly, in this sort of strange, three-way relationship, the Russians didn't seem to care. The Russians would say, well, it doesn't affect us if you want to attack an Iranian position here and there. So this strange pageant that went on for the last few years. This is different. It's Israel seeing an opportunity to preemptively prevent the new government in Syria, whoever it turns out to be, from ever threatening them, or at least in the near future. So they've essentially destroyed the entire Syrian Navy, something like, I don't know, the 17 ships that are kind of blown up and sunk at their moorings on the coast, destroyed something like 70% of Syria's airplanes, their military aircraft.
Are they just doing, and these are through airstrikes?
Through airstrikes. And I don't know if there's been sort of standoff missile strikes too. It's mostly been by air. But sortie after sortie, and it's just they're going after everything that could be militarily valuable to Syria. And the new leaders, HTS, is complaining kind of mildly about it, but also saying, we don't want to have a war with anyone. And so it doesn't seem to matter that much to them if all of Assad's military assets get wiped out, which is what's happening systematically. And I think when you see those earthquake explosions, this is an indication that Israel sees some kind of underground structure, some kind of deep bunker in which Assad had something. Maybe it's residual chemical weapons, maybe it's some kind of production facility that we don't know about. But Israel sees an opportunity to go after them, whether they know what it is or not, and just put a dent in everything that Syria is trying to do, or anything that a future Syrian government could try to bring against the Israelis.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about them today, but they were seriously concerned just because of their geometric. Oh my God, the close location they have to Syria when Syria had all these chemical weapons because they were worried that they could use any in Israel. Did Assad really care about that, though? It seemed like, to me, just reading from the outside, it was like one of those things where, all right, well, some of the Arab world doesn't like Israel, so publicly that's kind of what we'll say. But it was almost like that wasn't his fight.
Yeah, it wasn't his fight in recent years, but it had been historically, because Israel and Syria fought two significant wars, so 67 and 73.
That's right, yeah.
And in both cases, Syria got whooped pretty badly. In 73, in that case, after some initial forays into the Golan, the Israelis pushed them back almost to the border of Damascus, outskirts of Damascus. So they destroyed a lot of Syrian tanks and planes and really decimated their armed forces. And so Syria's response to that is, well, we can't really compete with the Israelis, in terms of our army. we don't have a nuclear weapon, which Israel does have. So we're going to create the world's biggest chemical arsenal. And so that's what they tried to do. That was their project. This was our deterrence against a possible Israeli attack on us. And they invested a lot of money. And again, this was not just some side project. This was their most significant military investment, was to create serious chemical weapons and the delivery systems, missiles, bombs, things they could send to Tel Aviv to kill thousands of people. And they thought that would keep them safe. And then, in 2013, 2014, that arsenal almost disappeared, except for whatever bits they managed to hide away. But Israel saw it as a very serious threat when it existed, to the extent that to which, when the civil war broke out in Syria in 2011, Israelis were given, in the north, were given gas masks and preparations for a possible chemical attack by Syria. They expected it might happen.
Well, now they're also in the middle of this. I think like one of the leading causing factors of this being able to happen is the fact that Israel happens to be in the middle of a serious issue now in Lebanon, where Hezbollah has to have people on the ground and all kinds of funding from Iran going there, such that Syria was left kind of exposed here.
Yeah.
Right? Because the focus was more on Lebanon.
Yeah. And they were kind of out of it in a way. But Syria had been kind of the supply route for Iran to supply material weapons to Hezbollah. Hezbollah had helped prop up the Syria's government for the years since the chemical weapons incident took place. Are you hearing this audio?
Yeah, no, you're good. Don't worry about it. It's just Siri talking to you. It happens.
I've got this thing where anytime I say Syria,
it pops off.
Siri. So
that's a problem.
Yeah, I get that at random times. It's really funny.
But you were saying they were using Syria as like the
as a
pathway
corridor.
to get
to. And but now you got Israel has just whatever you think about the way things have gone in the last year, they have certainly remade the map of the region. That Iran had built an army on Israel's northern border, a very capable military force with we always throw around the figure about 150,000 missiles and rockets pointed
Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, and that was a real capability. A lot of those were guided systems that could potentially strike military bases, nuclear facilities in Israel. And we just always assumed that was just going to be a permanent feature of the landscape until some future conflict. And we've had the conflict now. So there's Hezbollah has lost something like 80% of its missiles. Its leadership has been decimated. It no longer has an ally in Syria. That doesn't exist anymore. It's a complete, 180-degree change from what we saw, a year and a half ago. And you do have to kind of step back and see, geez, the whole security, environment has completely changed for Israel in the last year.
Again, though, it's like the downstream effects of this stuff are what you can't get away from.
Yeah.
And my friend Brandon Buckingham, you ever seen his channel on YouTube? I ever showed you that? Mm. He's awesome. He does these amazing documentaries, goes and does like underground stories, could be in the streets or somewhere internationally now, doing a lot of great work. But he was supposed to go shoot a documentary in India like a few months ago. And on the way to India, something happened with his visa. And they said, all right, you can't come in. So he's like, all right, well, I'm already halfway over the world, so where should I divert my flight to? He's like, oh, let's go to Lebanon. Goes to Lebanon, and the bombing starts like the next day or something like that. And he made this amazing over an hour-long documentary where he was just capturing on the ground what people were saying and what's going on. And it was so sad because some of the guys he filmed with are dead now.
Wow.
And these were perfectly regular civilians. And the things they kept pointing out in this documentary are like, here is a normal place where we go all the time and like people are on vacation or doing whatever. And now you can't even go there.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, it's like Israel has such strong fortifications on their border. They have such a highly capable military. They have the most talented intelligence apparatus in the world. It's like, okay, yes, I agree. That's a threat if like Hezbollah, funded by Iran, has 150,000 people towards the border. But isn't there, I understand war is extremely complicated. Isn't there a better way to go about this, though, that's not just so blatantly striking places where you are now fomenting hatred,
Yeah.
where people are now who weren't going to be terrorists or weren't going to be, I won't even say that, like oppositional forces to Israel are now going to grow up
Yeah.
wanting to be that?
Yeah, and that's the part that you can't control and you can't prevent, because and we learned this in Iraq, we learned it in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Every strike, every death of a terrorist target, you end up creating more enemies, because that guy had a family, he had brothers, he had uncles, and so now they're part of the cause. And what we see in Gaza, and I think this is the long-term problem that we haven't begun to wrestle with. There are people who have nothing left. They've lost entire families. They've got nothing to live for. There's this one, I was an interview with a physician who was in Gaza, had no particular beef with the Israelis, certainly didn't like them, but had no reason to fight them until an airstrike killed his children. He had a daughter who survived, and then she ended up dying of her injuries. And his comment to the interviewer was, the only thing I have to live for now is revenge, and so I'm going to dedicate my life to that. And that is the unfortunate reality. And it's people in the region who've been affected and have been radicalized, but also that radicalization tends to not just stay in the region, but it spreads. And what we've found in our reporting is that there are many people around the world who see Gaza as a cause for them, a reason for them to potentially participate in a terrorist attack in the future. And that is part of the unintended consequences of every fight like this.
Did you cover the whole beepers thing?
I did.
Exploding beepers?
I wrote about that quite a bit.
Yeah, that was a few months ago now. What was the full story? That was pretty wild.
Yeah.
I read it at the time, but
it's one of the craziest intelligence operations I've ever heard about. And it was one of these things like kind of like the Stuxnet thing in Iran a few years ago, when there was like an intelligence operation that ended up destroying a big chunk of the centrifuges that Iran had to make enriched uranium with. But this was even more consequential. Basically, Israel had this long-term operation where it worked with a vendor without the vendor's knowledge to get a contract to supply beepers to Hezbollah. And they were specifically marketed to Hezbollah because they were more rugged than your normal ones, so they could withstand all kinds of tough conditions. And they had like a super battery that could last for a very long time, all the things you'd want to have in a conflict situation. So Hezbollah thought, great, we'll buy a lot of these. And they equipped their entire, essentially the entire middle-level management of Hezbollah, thousands of people, ended up getting these beepers. And it turns out that the Israelis had very cleverly, infiltrated this sort of the supply chain to put explosives in every one of those. And they were so ingeniously made that the explosives would not show up if you put it through like a metal detector or if you put it through like an airport screener. It was like a thin strip of explosives that blended in with the battery itself. So even if you took it apart, you couldn't see it. But the Israelis controlled the trigger. And at a moment of their choosing, and this is like a operation that began before October 6th or 7. Nobody really knew when they were going to use it.
This was Mossad run?
Mossad run. And they saw their moment in October of this year and decided just to fire those things off. And they ended up crippling Hezbollah's management up and down the chain. And then they followed it up by killing Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, in a bombing.
Right.
And so within the space of about 3 weeks, Hezbollah went from being this formidable machine, this formidable military, to suddenly being confused and disrupted and chaos everywhere. And then that was followed by a ground invasion that went after all those missile depots, all those places where those thousands of missiles were hidden. And Israel's gotten something like 80% of them, destroyed them.
What made it the right moment? Like, why didn't they do it earlier?
It was
they had that capability.
It was controversial, and we know this from our reporting that it went up to a cabinet meeting. The Israeli prime minister did not know that Mossad had done this, and there was like a big kind of fierce argument that broke out in the cabinet meeting where this was discussed, and somebody
didn't tell Netanyahu.
Didn't tell Netanyahu until they were making a decision about whether to use it. So even the leadership did not know that they had done this. And then they were kind of faced with this decision: do we take advantage of this thing that we've done? And one of the reasons they decided to kind of pull the trigger was there had been some compromise someplace along the chain. Somebody they believed had figured out that these things might be booby-trapped. And if that happened, if people got the idea that these might be dangerous, then you've lost your asset. So you either use it or lose it. And so that kind of went into this decision-making in October when they finally pulled the trigger. The part of this debate in the cabinet, there was this I think it was IDF who, apparently someone from IDF opposed the idea of blowing up the pagers for various reasons. And they said, Mossad, your little toys are going to get us all into a lot of trouble one of these days. But no one anticipated that it would work so well. And it actually, from their point of view, it worked extremely well. And there's never, like I said, there's never been anything like it. It was disruptive, but also it was the moment that kind of was the pivot in this, years-long conflict that from being, two not exactly equally matched adversaries, but two adversaries that respected each other, to being something where one side has just been weakened beyond repair.
Watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.